conversation topic for today is designed to follow on from Rachel's speech yesterday. To quote James Carville, it's the economy stupid, or more precisely, it's how to unlock economic growth by investing in our future. The plan is for Rachel and Jim to have a fireside chat for about 35-40 minutes, and then we'll open up to questions. And I should say, we're very lucky to have both our speakers here today, as they're uniquely well placed to talk about the future of the British economy. Yes, I think you are. So, let me say why. So Jim is one of the UK's foremost economic oracles. He is... you have to live up to this now, Jim. He's famous for coining the BRICS term back in the early 2000s, long before anyone else saw that. And as he's told me, he's got that stamped on his forehead for his life now. But since then, he's worked extensively in and outside and around government, including as Commercial Secretary of the Treasury in 2015 and 16, and most recently leading the Startup and Scale-Up Review for Labour. As for Rachel, she's also an economic oracle, having cut it. So you're both in for it now. She cut her teeth at the Bank of England. I think her first job was forecasting the Japanese economy. And she's obviously always thinking a few moves ahead. But not only is she an oracle, she is an economic change maker. And we heard yesterday she has a plan on how to rebuild Britain and to get our economic future back. So let's hear more about that plan. Jim, Rachel, a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. Over to you.
It is a great pleasure, and thank you to the Tony Blair Institute for asking me to have this enormous privilege. Given that very kind intro, I certainly suspect I should probably just find some excuse to now leave, and then because I don't know whether I can really do as you imply. Rachel, it's an amazing privilege to do this with you. Why don't I start with the growth thing, which, even though I've not managed to be at events where it's been used, but certainly in the way the national media is covering your whole approach, and I don't just mean you, I mean the whole party and the leadership, growth is coming over loud and clear. And so, and you and I have talked about this a bit before, but I want to explore bits of it if we can here to start us going. In your mission about trying to have the strongest growth in the G7, what bit about it, if any, other than it being a mission, a nice mission, what bit about it really gets you going?
Well, thank you very much, Jim, and Tom and TBI for hosting this event today. As you say, Jim, the economic mission of the next Labour government is to have the highest sustained growth with good jobs and productivity rising in all parts of the country, making everyone, not just a few, better off. And not only is that our economic mission, it is the most important mission of all the five that we have set out, because the truth is we won't be able to achieve any of the other missions, whether that is making the NHS fit for the future, expanding opportunity, getting to clean energy by 2030, unless we have a growing economy. Because it is a growing economy that lifts living standards. It is a growing economy that gives us the money to invest in public services. And I feel that the missing ingredient in our economy over the last 13 years has been sustained economic growth. Because even with the upward revisions that we saw from the ONS, all that gives us is low growth rather than no growth. And that is not the summit of my ambition. The reason that growth is exciting is it is the building blocks upon which everything else rests. If we had have grown over these last 13 years at the same rate that we did in the 13 years before that under the governments of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, then we would have had tens of billions more to spend on public services without raising a single penny of tax. And we've had the opposite these last 13 years, the highest tax burden in 70 years, and yet public services, literally crumbling in some cases.
So it's really, for me, refreshing to hear how you started off by padding that out, but I want to delve a bit further. helped by some very good briefing from Tom. As it turns out, I can't resist making a silly little joke about this. It is one of the reasons why you want to give the OBR more powers, is because as it happens, and I didn't realise this till Tom showed me, the OBR is forecasting that over the next 5 years, the UK will have the highest GDP growth per capita of any G7 country. So more substantially, would that, so it could, according to, I presume they're not doing it based on the fact they think there's a different government coming in, it's just their objective forecast. So job done, or what would that, if it transpired as you're going through, if you are elected, your first term of office? Unless it's doing the other stuff, I'm assuming you're saying, well, it's nice that that's happening, but unless other brief periods where we've had statistically high GDP growth per capita, but it hasn't led to spreading around the country, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think about all that?
Well, I want that growth to be felt by people in all parts of the country. And I also feel that we've missed out too much on the contributions of people in different parts of the country. And the opportunities in the next few years are quite exciting, because as we do make that transition to a zero carbon economy, the sorts of jobs that opens up the possibility of are jobs that are going to be in green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. And those jobs will be in places like Grangemouth, in Merseyside, on the Humber, jobs in floating offshore wind in Grimsby and Cleethorpes, and the offshore in Wales as well, jobs in gigafactories in Sunderland and Blyth and Coventry. And the great things about these jobs is they're not jobs in London and the home counties, they're jobs in parts of the country that, you know, powered the first industrial revolution and can power this one as well. But we can't take for granted that those jobs will come to Britain, because you go to the US and you see the huge impact the Inflation Reduction Act is having there in galvanizing and encouraging investment. And the thing about investment, you know, it is mobile. I mean, you know this better than me. It goes to where the opportunities are greatest. And at the moment, you know, sadly, that is not Britain. Right. Other countries are then responding to the Inflation Reduction Act. Europe is, Asia is. Around the world, you've got governments that are trying to seize these opportunities. And the response from British ministers earlier this year, when that Inflation Reduction Act came in, was, this is dangerous. Well, yeah. I'll tell you what is dangerous. It's sitting on the sidelines whilst others are in a global race for the jobs and industries of the future. But look, the point I'm trying to make is that if we win the next election, through our plans to invest alongside industry in these huge opportunities, then we can get that growth and prosperity in parts of the country that have missed out for too long on those opportunities, and grow the economy that is from the bottom up and the middle out, rather than the sort of an economic growth based only on a few people, a few places, a few industries, which is not the growth that I want to see, and is not the sustained growth that is going to lift living standards, and that's what we need.
Sounds like a serious Northern powerhouse strategy to me. I'll come back to aspects of that, because I want to delve, and indeed some of it relates to the startup review and stuff we discuss a lot. But just one other angle on the notional or the GDP target. And I was thinking about this, and now that I'm reminded of the fact you had the dubious privilege of studying Japan at the bank, actually, which I suppose the bank coffers wouldn't spread to you. Did you get to go there as part of that job? Or?
No, but I moved to the US desk after a year, and that's how I then ended up working at the British Embassy in Washington.
Right. Of my decade since I don't know why I'm going on about this, but there's something about going to Japan that it's still quite Japanese. You know what I mean? It's sort of, they kind of keep...
You heard it here first.
never go off script. I don't know why I'm. What I mean is, they somehow managed to retain the beauty of aspects of their culture and da-da-da. However,
And they've got very good trains.
very good trains. There you go. They don't think she's a really good chess player for nothing, do they? But what I really wanted to raise as a result of it is the demographics and the population stuff. Because again, I was just chatting it through with Tom beforehand. Japan has effectively had no nominal GDP growth for getting on for 20 years. In the BRICS stuff, if I remember rightly, the stuff that started to make it famous, we had China becoming bigger than Japan. I think it was 2016 onwards, and in fact, by the time it got there, it was twice the size of Japan. And one of Japan, but the flip side of that, which is a very important thing that economists think about, not as much as they should, is that actually, if you look at GDP per capita, the past 20 years, Japan's had one of the best in the G7, but they've done it not deliberately. It's because the working population has collapsed, which, of course, with the way the immigration issue has become such an emotive topic here, at times seems like some deliberate strategy for UK going forward. But if you relate all of that back to the UK the past 20 years, our GDP growth has been pretty close to 2%, at least before COVID. But there was no GDP per capita growth because we had such huge population growth. So how does all of that figure into how you think about this stuff?
Well, I was analysing the Japanese economy. When was that? It was the early 2000 that I did that work, and at that time people were talking about Japan's lost decade. Yep. And here we are, 20 years later, and people do talk about Japan's lost decades because after that financial crash in the 1990s. Japan never really got back to the growth rates that they had seen before that. And when I was looking at the Japanese economy then, it was at a time when they had zero interest rate policy to try and stimulate growth, when they used quantitative easing, well before that came to the UK a decade later. But it took Japan a long time to get there. And they were very conservative with a small c in trying that approach, which you now have very low but at least some inflation in Japan, because deflation was their big problem. When you have deflation, people don't want to spend because they think the prices of goods will be cheaper tomorrow. Now, obviously, that's not a problem we have in the UK today, where we've got a huge cost of living crisis with inflation too high. But I did go to Japan a few years ago when I chaired the Business Select Committee in the last Parliament, and this issue about population growth and an ageing society, obviously those demographic impacts in Japan have been really challenging for them, but it has meant that you've had a much greater adoption of technology than you have in other countries. And I think robots per head of population in Japan and in South Korea are higher than anywhere else in the world. And what policymakers and business leaders said to me in Japan, well, necessity is the mother of all invention, because they needed the robots to make up for the lack of population growth. But it does mean, as you say, that productivity in Japan is pretty high. We went to this fascinating place when we were there, which was a factory making robots, but it was robots making robots. It was really quite something. But that use of technology is quite exciting in countries like Japan. And I think we do have a lot to learn from it, because our productivity growth has been very poor in Britain. And actually, rising population growth from immigration has, I think, sometimes exacerbated the slow take-up of technology in the UK economy, because you could hire workers pretty cheaply rather than invest in the expensive, but in the end, productivity enhancing technology. So I think there are real opportunities in the years ahead to get some of that productivity growth through the use of technology.
So let's put Japan aside for now and come back to these issues and much of what you talked about yesterday. I was delighted to observe, because I couldn't get there in time, that you highlighted an ambition to also get investment spending back to the, I think, the G7 average and our historic average, which, as you know, I've said to you privately, if the GDP per capita ambition is anything beyond a statistical thing, you can't get there really unless investment spending does what you said yesterday.
I mean, look, business investment is the lifeblood of any successful economy, but it has fallen back compared with our historical average, but also fallen back compared with our peers, and our R&D spending as well is not as high as our competitors. And, in the end, that is not the basis for a successful economy. And we've done a lot of work together, haven't we, on how we can get Britain to be the best place to start and scale up businesses. And we've got, we're really, really good. We shouldn't be, negative about everything, because there are some fantastic things going on. And there are brilliant entrepreneurs, great ideas coming out of our universities. But the big challenge is getting the funding for those businesses. And often we lose successful unicorn, fast-growing businesses to the US, because that's where they're able to access the long-term capital to grow their businesses. And one of the things that Jim and I have worked on is how, for example, we can unlock some of the money invested in pensions. We've got the second biggest in the world assets under management in pensions in the UK, and yet increasingly that money is invested in government bonds rather than in productive capital, and we want to change that. And investment into unlisted equities, the spin-out companies that we are developing and nurturing, but not growing at the speed and the scale we want to see, and where we're too often losing them to the US. We want to both help get higher returns for savers, but also unlock some of that capital to help that thriving part of the economy. And you're doing a lot of that with Northern Gritstone, with 3 northern universities, which is really exciting, but it does need to happen at greater scale.
It certainly does. I want to explore many bits of that, and I'm already looking at my watch because I'm going to save 20 minutes for you guys. You didn't mention it yet, but it now tees me up for that, because it also potentially relates to some of the other issues, including industrial strategy. One of the things that really excited me about your mission statement is that it seems to have fallen in line with one of our biggest recommendations, which is trying to make the British Business Bank a lot more aspirational and a bit what you might call a British version of Temasek, if people in business here are familiar with what they do for Singapore, in that it really plays, rather than for those of you not familiar with it, the British Business Bank has an arm which is the largest passive investor in venture capital in the country. However, it sort of does it in a very gentle civil service, sorry guys at the BBB, kind of way. As opposed to being given, because it's owned by the taxpayer, here's what we want to do more of, and we're expecting you to be more on the front foot about it. That's how I've interpreted it myself. Maybe it's because I want it to be what you guys do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, we looked as part of your review into some of the best practice happening overseas, And one of the things that President Macron has done in France is to really try and turbocharge investment into fast-growing businesses. And it's quite exciting. The TB scheme that they've set up there is trying to do what we want to do in the UK, which is to try and get more institutional capital invested in start-up businesses and scale-up businesses. And they've done it through creating a sort of fund which venture capital can invest into of sort of hand-picked, a bit like what we would like the British Business Bank to do, businesses that have got real opportunities. And some of them will succeed and some of them won't, but it's a fund in which venture capital and institutional investors can invest into, which can help deliver better returns for savers, but also unlock the capital that if you don't unlock at home, businesses will go overseas. And we've already, Arm Holdings is obviously the most famous example of the loss of a UK business to the US stock market, but we see businesses that are already listed in the UK delisting and relisting in the US. You're seeing businesses that start up here listing straight on the US indices rather than here in the UK, because that is where they're able to raise their money. And if we lose those businesses, in the end, we'll probably end up losing those jobs and losing those investments in the UK. And, I really want to see those jobs and those investments in Britain. Right. But at the moment, we are missing out on too much of that. So there are exciting. Temasek is one example. The TB scheme in France is another.
Yeah, really good.
Everyone else is sort of going further and faster, whether it is in getting the jobs in the industries that net zero presents, or whether it is unlocking investments in some of these fast-growing tech businesses. And there's so much more we could be doing, and I feel hungry to get on and actually start delivering some of these best practices.
That's nice to hear. To the broader investment point, a cynic would say, well, again, who wouldn't want to get investment spending to that share of GDP? And if we can split it out a bit to public and private, not least because, as you well know, what's coming. On the public side, I think we need to have, and I think you've created the space for it, dare I say, a more really at the same time, really financially market credible, but a more ambitious approach to fiscal rules. Because how else can the biggest patient capital investor in existence, which is the government, be at the centre of that unless it does? And I'm not. Maybe some of this end up going a bit geeky-ish. I don't know. I apologise, but you might want to expand on what I thought was really exciting when you announced it 3 weeks ago about the increased importance to the OBR and what you would do with it. Not least because, quite amusing for me, given my past and for the politics of it, none other than George Osborne came out within seconds saying that the Tory party should adopt that immediately.
Yes, well, it was very good at the Labour Party conference yesterday that the OBR got a huge round of applause. I think if the OBR was mentioned at the Tory conference, it would be booed.
That's funny.
That's
really funny.
Yes, I said that I wanted to give greater powers to the OBR, and the conference all loved it. Wow.
Hear.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, obviously, the reason the economy crashed last year when Liz Truss and the Tory party did that mini-budget was because they had uncosted tax cuts, which just didn't add up. But there was another reason as well, and that was the undermining of the economic institutions that give stability to the UK economy. So we had a whole summer last year that Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng and Jacob Rees-Mogg were just undermining the Bank of England and their independence and blaming them for the problems. You then had Kwasi Kwarteng refusing to allow the Office for Budget Responsibility to do a forecast to accompany the so-called mini-budget, despite the fact I think it was the biggest fiscal event for decades. And then third...
Mind-boggling.
Yeah, and then third, you had the sacking of the very respected Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, Tom Scholar, and those three things, along with the sheer scale of the unfunded tax cuts, caused the market meltdown that we experienced this time just over a year ago. So what I've said is that, you know, the last Labour government gave operational independence to the Bank of England. George Osborne created the Office for Budget Responsibility in 2010, and we would give the Office for Budget Responsibility additional powers. We call it a new Charter for Budget Responsibility and a fiscal lock, which says that when there are permanent and significant tax and spending changes, the Office for Budget Responsibility should provide a forecast alongside those. And I mean, that should be sort of quite uncontroversial, but you had Liz Truss herself then wrote for the Mail on Sunday after that announcement, saying that this was just putting more more powers in the hands of unelected quangos. So if anyone was in any doubt of whether my policy was a good one, could read the Daily Mail to find out exactly how good it is. So it was great to have that. Thanks, Liz.
Have you ever had a glass of wine with Liz in one of the Commons bars?
No, I haven't. Maybe I should buy her one. But no, I think it is. I do take seriously the independence of those economic institutions. They have provided a framework for the UK that has, given us lower borrowing costs because of that stability. But there is now, I think some people call it the moron premium, that it costs more for governments to borrow in the UK than in other countries around the world because of the damage that they did last year. And that's why I will put in this new fiscal lock so that never again can a Prime Minister or Chancellor try and force through policies that are uncosted, unscrutinised, and in that case, wholly detached from economic reality.
There you go.
Thank you.
I am a cross-bencher here, so I have to be a little bit careful, but I just want to say, in my view, that would be a very good thing for British PLC. Anyhow, there's three other areas I want to explore, but linked to some of that and related to your industrial strategy. What about the other part, the infrastructure bank? I think it was interpreted out of the mission statement, actually also casually by me, but I never thought about it much, that would become some kind of real Temasek in terms of a sovereign wealth fund. And what about the role that you would expect or want from them to play in helping guide? I'm talking with Jürgen about it earlier, about a proper connected industrial strategy that allows all the support businesses to plan for a period as opposed to the rather intriguing games going on around HS2, blah, 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 blah. What about that?
Yeah, so I announced two separate reviews yesterday in my conference speech. One that will be led by our Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, which will look at the lessons that we can learn from HS2. And I think Lou will be speaking more about that in her speech this afternoon. Because, what is really frustrating, it took it getting to the stage where HS2 was £30 billion over budget before the Prime Minister decided to step in. And it should never have been allowed to get to that stage. If I had been in the Treasury, I would have had the bosses in at HS2 to work out what could be done to get this project under control.
Is this the sort of thing you, in your framework, you would say, right, OBR, you guys do an analysis and show it transparently, publicly. What is the real story?
I'm not sure if that's a role for the OBR, but it is a role for the Treasury to make sure that projects are on time, on budget, and delivered. And the problem is there is a pattern opening up here, because HS2 is not the only big project in jeopardy. And so we've asked Lou to do this review, and I know that she's going to be announcing some of the people involved in that this afternoon. And Darren Jones, the new Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, will do a wider review at other infrastructure projects, so that I hope after the next election, if we are in those jobs in government, we know what we're going to be facing as an incoming government, and we can get those projects on track, because we are, I think I said it in the conference speech yesterday, we've become the sick man of Europe when it comes to the delivery of projects, and it is just not good enough. It is not right that it costs so much to build a kilometre of rail track in the UK compared with our competitors. We should be able to do this stuff. The first train, the Stockton to Darlington Railway, was built in England. We should be able to deliver these projects, but we seem to have lost that knack, and that's why Lou and Darren are going to do these reviews for us.
I've got two other areas, and I want to try and get it done within 10 minutes. And they're both big subjects, and there's many other things, obviously, we could talk about. But by coincidence, The Economist magazine this week has quite a detailed discussion about the Biden IRA, and I think Securenomics gets quite a mention. And not surprisingly, given The Economist's approach to life, they are hugely critical of it being a really effective long-term strategy for the West. But I want to ask you about how you respond to that kind of view, and with it, not least, because you and I also been chatting about in the last week, whether it's related to it or not, there is a rather spectacular rise in 10-year US bond yields going on, which is influencing bond yields all over the world. And some people are saying that some of that is what financial economists would describe as an additional term premium for the longer term risk that all that IRA stuff is creating in the US, and therefore it's a warning sign of you want to be careful about what it is you're going to promise, because unless it is creating productivity enhancing stuff, you're going to end up with a colossal mess.
Well, look, it seems to me that the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act have been a game changer in terms of galvanising private sector investment. And, since the beginning of this year, businesses have been saying to me that looking at where to invest, it is a no-brainer often that if you go to the US, you've got these huge subsidies and support for investment in some of these fast-growing industries, and a lot of these investments would not happen unless you have a partnership approach. You take carbon capture and storage. There are huge opportunities in the UK, but we haven't got anything happening at scale, and you only will through a public-private partnership. It is a new technology, the de-risking that government can bring, but also the coordination between the projects, and to actually be able to store the carbon in the North Sea is going to require government being part of that. And it is also totally clear that you can only achieve our net zero ambitions in the UK with carbon capture and storage. You can only get cement and ceramics and steel to net zero if you can have carbon capture and storage. But at the moment, because of the investment that the US is putting in, that is where the jobs and the private sector investment is going. And I just don't want to find that in 10, 20 years' time that we're importing all of our cars because we failed to build the gigafactories here. We're importing our electricity because we failed to go far enough. That we are importing our gas because we didn't do green hydrogen here. There's every reason to believe, because of our great universities, our industrial heritage, our geography, the skill set in Britain, that we can be leaders in these jobs. But it won't happen by chance. Right. It will only happen through this partnership approach that you're seeing everywhere else. And I just think that the game has changed and we're just not in the race at the moment. And I think that is a massive missed opportunity.
Last one for me for now. Keir and you have talked a lot and a lot more recently about improving relationships with the EU. A cynic might say, what is in it for the EU to do that unless we actually want to rejoin the single market?
Well, Keir and me and the whole Labour team been clear that Labour will not rejoin the single market, the customs union, or bring back freedom of movement. We had that referendum. It's more than 7 years ago now.
So exhausting.
Just because we accept that Brexit has happened does not mean that we think that the deal that Boris Johnson got was as good as it can be. And there are a number of areas where we want to see change. So, for example, we want a food and farming agreement, a veterinary deal, to improve the flow, not just of food and farming products, but to reduce some of the other delays and bureaucracy we're seeing at the border. Because Britain is a leader in professional and business services, we want to secure the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, which we had before Brexit, but we don't have today. And because we're so, we excel in creative industries, we want to secure, to make it easier for British artists to be able to tour around Europe without the costs and bureaucracy that is available today. Those are just 3 areas where we would like to see change. We'll get into those negotiations in government, but as Keir has said, a Labour government does not want to water down standards for workers' rights, environmental standards and food standards. And so we hope that it will be easier for a Labour government to secure a deal. But, I'm not naive about the scale of those challenges and the difficulty of those negotiations. But I hope that the European Union will see, with a Labour government, a desire to normalise relations, to work in greater partnership based on the shared values and the things that do bind us together. But it won't be easy, but it is an ambition that we have.
Okay, for now, I'm going to come to you guys, and I'm going to look at you. So, hang on. For respect for the hosts, I'm going to actually ask Tom to ask a question, and then we're done with that. I'm going to come to the audience if I can and ask you in groups of 3. But before we start, please, short question and not some philosophical statement of your views on the plan. Tom.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Rachel. Riveting discussion. So my question's about your fiscal instincts. So some chancellors are unlucky. They inherit quite a dire fiscal situation, slow growth. That sounds familiar. But some chancellors are lucky. They get an unexpected windfall, say something like the North Sea in the 70s and 80s. And so whilst it's clear that Britain is currently down on its luck, it's not entirely implausible to imagine a situation where we do get a sort of pick-up in growth, perhaps from technology. So my question is, if Labour were to get elected and they were to sort of receive an unexpected windfall, say of £100 billion, 4% of GDP, something like that, how would you spend it? Would you cut the debt? Would you cut taxes? Would you increase spending on your Green Prosperity Plan, your new National Wealth Fund? Would you boost the NHS? Or would you do something different that you can't currently do?
I didn't know he was going to ask this.
Because of the fiscal situation.
I always say to my colleagues they're not allowed to make unfunded spending commitments, so I don't think I'm going to sit here and speculate. But look, I I've set out a set of fiscal rules, which is that we will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts, that we will get debt down as a share of our economy, and then subject to that, we will invest in those things that will boost the long-term potential of our economy. But boosting the potential of the economy is not just about spending more money. It is also about the planning reforms to fast-track the infrastructure investment that we need, whether that be in 5G or transport, energy or science labs. A stat that I didn't use in the speech, but that I was looking at last week was that 3/4 of the planning applications for new science labs around Oxford and Cambridge are just stuck in limbo. And this is just another example of how Britain will lose out on jobs and investment if we can't have a planning system that actually allows the builders to build if projects are not even being looked at because they are not in the national plan for significant projects. So it's not just about spending to get our economy growing. There are other things that we can do as well that I hope then we'll see the economy growing, creating those tax receipts that then gives me as Chancellor options that we don't have today, because I am under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that I will face if Labour wins the next election. But I think we have set out now, and you'll see today more in Keir's speech, how exactly we are going to fulfil that mission to have the highest sustained growth in the G7.
Okay, there you go. Maybe I should just go to pick on people that have not raised a hand. And I'm going to, Jürgen, because he's my vice chair of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, you're one of the first three. There's a lady up at the back with a white top on who's got her hand up, and I assume there's endless mics flying around. And there's a guy on the right-hand side who's sitting on the stairs. Start with you, and that's it. Question, please, punchy, unless it's about getting rid of the Glazers at Manchester United. No statements on life. Jürgen first.
Thank you. I mean, you talked about it, which is that it's definitely not just about GDP growth. It's about the quality of that. It's about productivity, business investment. It's about exports. And a lot of that is not in the unicorns. It's nice to get the investments for gigafactories. A lot of it is about the small to medium-sized companies which are in those supply chains. So the question is, if you can talk a little bit more about, you know, the sorts of interventions you would do a private-public partnership with to help those smaller companies adopt technology, use more innovation. And look, we have got some great mechanisms we've created, like catapults, Made Smarter, all of these things. None of it hangs together. So, you know, what would you do to help the medium-sized sector and put some of that 100 billion into helping those companies?
Hold that one. The lady I went to at the back.
Thanks very much. Labour has done a lot to sort of rebrand and present a good pitch to businesses. But how does that work with the radical New Deal for workers that promises to scrap 0-hour contracts and provide a genuine living wage?
And the guy who's now stood up.
Charlie Jeffrey, Vice Chancellor, University of York, and Chair of the
Charlie,
Golden Octagon.
My eyesight is dreadful, sorry.
Chair of the Golden Octagon of research universities in the North. Great to hear you, Rachel, talk about the importance of our universities. Great to hear Peter Kyle yesterday talking about certainty of planning of research and innovation funding. Great to hear the passion that Bridget Phillipson is bringing to the skills debate. What we've seen under this government is a complete dislocation of those two things, the research and innovation and the skills. We need them together. How could you help?
There you go. I think there's some relationship broadly, those three questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, all three of you, for those questions. Yeah, Jürgen, you're absolutely right to talk about the supply chains. It's not just the big businesses. I mean, actually, and Charlie mentioned there, Bridget, just one thing which I've been very struck by, when I was in the West Midlands recently, talking to some car manufacturers, but also the supply chain that sits behind that, and the transition that we need to see towards electric vehicles. One business told me about how the apprenticeship levy today just does not help them at all, because if they wanted to reskill people working in production lines to produce cars with an internal combustion engine, they wouldn't be able to use the apprenticeship levy to retrain them. But if they sacked them all and brought in a new lot of people, they could use the apprenticeship levy to train them up to produce electric vehicles. That makes no sense at all. It needs to be a just transition towards net zero, and that means using the skills, the highly skilled workers that we have today working in car manufacturing or in oil and gas, ensuring that they've got the skills then to do the similar but different jobs in the new ways of producing, whether that's energy or cars or whatever. So the supply chain is really important, but for the supply chain skills, and for those smaller businesses, skills is absolutely essential, and we want to reform that apprenticeship levy, turn it into a growth and skills levy, something that, again, I think Keir will be talking about more today, and Bridget's spoken about very passionately. On the question... Thank you. On the question, on the question about workers' rights, look, Labour is a proudly pro-worker party. It is how we're created. It's in our DNA. But we are also a proudly pro-business party, because you can't be pro-worker unless you're pro the businesses that create the jobs and the wealth and prosperity. And also, you can't be pro-business unless you are pro-skilling up in the way that I've spoken about, working people to do the jobs of the future. So I see those two things as two sides of the same coin. But the securonomics that I speak about is about giving working people greater security. The philosophy of the Labour Party, that growth comes from the bottom up and the middle out, that everybody should be able to play their part, but then also that everyone should be able to benefit from that growth and prosperity, including through security at work. Higher wages through a real living wage is part of that, but also that security that comes from knowing that you've got a permanent secure job, and then you know what hours you're going to have this week and the week after. And there's now a mountain of evidence that greater security at work and better wages leads to a more motivated and a more productive workforce. And the best businesses around the UK and around the world know all of this. And so building on what the last Labour government did with the first ever introduction of a national minimum wage, we will go further and turn that into a real living wage, but also, yes, banning the 0-hour contracts, getting rid of fire and rehire, which goes against, I think, the principles of fairness and decency that British people and British businesses have. So the New Deal for working people is not somehow separate to our growth plans. It is an essential part of our plans to grow the economy and give security for working people. And then just on Charlie's point, you know, our universities are huge assets. We have some of the best universities in the world in Britain, and we should be really proud of that, but also take advantage of that as an engine for growth. And you know, Jürgen mentioned the catapult centres, the collaboration that we see between our universities and our business sector. Keir and I went on Sunday to the University of Liverpool to see really exciting work that they're doing on the sort of cusp between robotics and chemistry with Unilever, a great British company. And you see that at every university that you go to around the UK, and also some of the work that universities do with some of the smaller businesses to help them access technology and knowledge transfer that they wouldn't be able to on their own. So I see universities, again, as a key ingredient for our growth plan, but also something special that we have in the UK that other countries can't always compete with us on.
Okay, let's go more. God. I'm trying to be fair. There's a lady here in a black top. Yes, you're first. Also geographically, a guy over there who's got a blue shirt on and a grey suit. Why is there so many here? This guy with the Newcastle United type looking shirt on, which is nothing like it's black and white. You three, next. Sorry, first.
Eunice Simmons, University of Chester. We've worked with 2,500 SMEs in the last couple of years, so we're very aware of that agenda, but also Northwest Business Leadership Team I'm representing, and I want to know what's the economic framework you're going to use to make sure all the regions feel this economic uplift. We've had RDAs, we've had LEPs, we've had mayors, but there's a lot of the Northwest which is not even in the mayoral areas. So how are you going to make sure we all feel the benefits?
Okay, that's the first one. Where's the second guy? Yes, please.
Paul Swinney from the Centre for Cities. When you were talking about productivity and immigration, it seemed like you were suggesting that the immigration of recent years had pushed down productivity growth in the UK, but I was probably misinterpreting that. So I just want to know if you could just expand on that a little bit, please.
Good question, Paul. And thirdly...
my name's Mark. I'm a member from Dundee. I accept government cannot and should not do everything, and that there have been comparisons between your plan and President Biden's. But there's a big difference in the language he uses in terms of taxing wealth and the money that has been put into directly investing in green energy. Whereas obviously these are things that you have either kind of ruled out or kind of scaled back slightly within your fiscal rules. So I just wonder, what is the direct comparison you would make between Securenomics and Bidenomics?
Ooh. Okay. Nice, easy questions.
Okay, thank you for your question from the University of Chester. At the end of last year, we published a review that Gordon Brown did for Kia on devolution and how we can have more decisions made at a local level. And that's not just for areas that have mayors, but mayors will be a crucial part in delivering the growth agenda for an incoming Labour government, but also recognising that not all parts of the country have those mayors. And as I said in my answer to Charlie, I think universities have got a really important role to play in this agenda. On Paul's question, the only point I would make is that a low-skill economy is not one that is going to generate growth and prosperity, and investment, which has fallen in the last decade or so, we need to turn that around with more investment in technology, more investment in skills, so that we can compete globally for the high-pay, high-skill jobs that we want to see in the UK. On the third question, which sort of feels like a sort of a PhD thesis. When I became Shadow Chancellor, I said that there was a lot to learn from what the Democrats are doing in the US. I had the opportunity to meet Janet Yellen earlier this year, the US Treasury Secretary, who's driving so much of this agenda. And I think there are a number of similarities. Obviously, Labour's Green Prosperity Plan is our answer to the Inflation Reduction Act, but also our positioning of it. So, of course, I think that we've got a moral responsibility to meet our net zero targets. You can take that as a given. But I see here, and I've tried to expand on this in other answers as well, as a huge opportunity to create the high-skilled jobs in some of the industries of the future, and jobs that are in parts of the country that want and need that reindustrialisation and those high-pay, high-skill jobs. It's also about reducing bills, because either through retrofitting homes or investing in cleaner electricity, which is cheaper than gas and fossil fuels, we can help people reduce people's bills for good. But also, and this is something that I very much took from my conversations in the US, not just with Janet Yellen, but also with the National Security Council there, that security is absolutely essential. I said in the speech yesterday that this idea that the fastest, the cheapest, the quickest is always the best, I think that idea is dead, and I think globalisation as we once knew it is dead. But there is a new... there is a new...
walk out.
As we once knew it is dead. But there is a new form of multilateralism.
Better.
I told you, it's like
it's
like a Viva now on the PhD. But there's a
Good
new...
job we've got 10 minutes left.
I tell you, the conference floor are better behaved than Jim O'Neill. A new multilateralism between countries that share values and new partnerships developing. But we've got to wean ourselves off. Oil and gas, the price is driven by what is happening in Russia and the Middle East. And we need to do more to make, do and sell here in Britain to secure our national economy, to help secure family finances. So it's not just the industrial strategy, but it is also this philosophy that I take from what President Biden and Janet Yellen are doing, trying to inject more security into their national economy.
Okay, with a bit of luck, now 2 more quick rounds. And actually, no more hands can go up than those that are there now, because you won't get asked. I think there's a lady in the middle towards the back there with a black top on. That doesn't help me either. So you've got to guess which one I'm talking about. And then a guy sitting on the floor at the left at the top. And this gentleman here with the green trousers. Please say who you are as well. So I hope there's not 3 ladies up there that asked the question, because you're going to have a fight. But I think I've identified the one that you want. Please.
Hi, Rachel. I'm a young person from Green New Deal Rising. You're talking about investing in our future today, but we want to know if Labour will tax wealth and invest in a Green New Deal to tackle both the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis. A tax on wealth could generate billions that could feed families, fund public services and put young people's futures
like
first.
A
Will Labour be
statement.
bold and commit to a tax wealth now?
We had that question once already, but there you go. Gentleman sitting on the floor on the left.
Not a gentleman. I think you need to invest in some new glasses, Jim, but thank you.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Joe Milligan.
I am very sorry.
Joe Milligan from Liberty Steel. Very encouraged to hear some of your announcements yesterday, Rachel, about investment in critical infrastructure and strategic industries. Obviously, you can't have energy independence, as Ed announced in his speech yesterday, an Energy Independence Act, without actually having independent, secure supply chains for materials like steel. Everything in energy transition requires steel. Energy has obviously benefited from, over the last couple of decades, shared investment into the transition. Very encouraged again about the language around partnership between government and industry when it comes to materials like steel. Will you be looking at mechanisms similar to Contracts for Difference, which was a government industry partnership in decarbonising energy for decarbonising industry and the key supply chains that exist?
Okay, and the third one is go.
Christian Mole, Bromley and Chislehurst, CLP. Rishi Sunak's most recent...
Sorry?
Bromley and Chislehurst, CLP. Rachel's old stomping ground.
Like your backyard. You're obviously big mates.
Yeah, Chris was on my first ever election leaflet.
Yeah. we only exist for about another 2 days, sadly. Rishi Sunak's most recent tax return showed he paid out 21% income on tax on 3 million of income, because it's all investment income.
You're not going to be asking Rachel about her taxes, are you?
Kind of. Sorry about that. And growth in capital assets is way outstripping growth in payroll. Now you've ruled out a wealth tax, but do you agree this is a disparity that needs to be looked at?
Okay. Questions get easier as it goes on, doesn't it?
Well, maybe I'll take Christian's question with the young woman from the Green New Deal Rising. Look, I've committed to investing in the big opportunities that come from the climate transition. And as I said in the answer to the earlier question as well, you can take as given our commitment to getting to net zero and the clean energy by 2030, which Ed spoke about in his conference speech yesterday. and it's one of the 5 missions for an incoming Labour government. Very different from the short-termist approach that you see from the Conservative government, which is pushing back its commitments, even though they're not even on target to meet the ones that they've got today. And we've said, for example, that we do want to see all cars sold in the UK by 2030 to be electric vehicles, unlike the government pushing back that target. But we've set out how we will pay for that. It is part of the Green Prosperity Plan, including the creation of GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund to invest alongside business in the industries of the future, including steel, which, as you rightly say, from Liberty Steel, is absolutely essential for an industrial strategy, but also for a net zero strategy as well, and that commitment as well around green hydrogen, about carbon capture and storage, and about the investment in the electric steel arcs that we want to see in our steel industry, and supporting jobs, therefore, in Port Talbot, Scunthorpe, Sheffield, and other parts of the country. But we would do that through the Green Prosperity Plan, not through wealth taxes. You know, taxes in Britain are at a 70-year high already today. We've already set out how, for example, on the capital gains, that for private equity, that bonuses will be treated as income rather than as capital gains and will be taxed accordingly. But we don't plan a wholesale equalisation of capital gains and income tax rates, because when we did our review into how to make Britain the best place to start and scale up a business, we think it is important to create the incentives to invest in UK businesses, to help create businesses, to help grow businesses, and to have a preferential tax treatment in doing that. But we're confident that we can get to our commitments on net zero through the Green Prosperity Plan, with that big role for government to invest alongside business and to invest directly through GB Energy in steel, in green hydrogen, in ceramics, in carbon capture, in floating offshore wind, in tidal energy, in renewable-ready ports. All of these things that we can and we should be doing in the UK that you're not getting with the Conservative government, that we are determined to deliver as a Labour government.
Brilliant. 3 more, that's it, I'm afraid. There's a person, there's a lady I can see right in the middle at the back with her hand up. You're first, this guy here, and apologies to everybody else. I'm getting guided to do one over here somewhere. This guy here then. Apologies to everybody else. We're running out of time. 3 last questions, short and crisp, please.
Hi, I'm Andrew.
Oh, I'm going first. All right. Go on then, Andrew. Go on.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I used to work at TBI. I'm now a startup investor. Many of the technology companies that you talked about as being really important for the future of the UK are in sort of markets that matter. These are regulated markets, and particularly post-Brexit, there are a whole load of sort of blocks that are regulated, so we can't enable much of the innovation that will kind of make a difference to people's lives. I'm interested in how you would reform regulators to make them kind of better for kind of social outcomes, but also enabling innovation.
Okay, the lady in the middle at the back.
Thanks. I'm Miranda Barker. I'm the Chief Executive of East Lancs Chamber of Commerce. And we see the valley of death with our local low-carbon tech firms exactly between the funding for Catapults and Innovate UK and then when you get British Business Bank funding, the bit where you're literally trying to build your first product and generate your first jobs. Can we please see if we can link some of the investment and support from you directly to creating new jobs? And a quick follow-up, are you coming to COP28 and can we introduce you to some low-carbon tech firms if you are?
Okay, and then last
Okay, I'm a retired independent school teacher from Hull. Now, to avoid being lynched, I will say that I do agree in taxing the privileged to help the underprivileged, but I want to know how well you've done your maths homework. You should get £2 million in VAT from my old school. If 10% of the kids leave and you have to pay for their state school places, that drops to 1 million. And this is an existentialist threat for lots of northern independent schools. If it closes, you're going to have to find £8 million for those kids to go into state schools. So how well have you done your maths to ensure that it's not scenario 3?
Wow, what a toughie to finish on. Luckily, we only got 2 minutes left.
Right, okay. So on Andrew's question about regulators, we discussed this quite a lot yesterday, actually, at the Business Day conference. And one of the things that you'll know from Kia and the mission-led government is that we cannot allow governments and regulators to work in silos anymore. If we're going to deliver on those 5 missions, we need government working together as well as working with all of the other enablers to get to those, to achieve those missions. And it's one of the things that we're going to be looking at through the, not complacent, but preparation for government work that we'll be doing over the next year, and very much thinking about how the regulators fit in to help achieve some of those missions. So thank you for raising that point. You make a really important point, and it's a sort of both part of the Green Prosperity Plan, but also very much the work that Jim and I did on how to help those businesses at the stage that you rightly identify, that they can access capital, and the role of the British Business Bank, the role of a pension fund investment and institutional investment is really crucial, but it's about how to coordinate that. And we recognise as well through the review that we did that if you are a woman entrepreneur, if you are outside of London and the Southeast, if you are from a black or minority ethnic background, access to finance is even harder for those business leaders. So we've done a lot of work on this, but we absolutely want to make sure that businesses at that stage, whether they are in green industries or any industries, can access the capital that they need to grow. And thanks for raising the issue about VAT on private schools. Well, look, don't take my word for it. The Institute for Fiscal Studies looked at our proposals and looked at the elasticities of demand for private schools and concluded that our policy would raise between 1.3 and 1.5 billion pounds, even when you take into account the decisions that parents made. But we will use every penny of that money to invest in our state schools, in 6,400 new teachers, in retaining teachers that we already have in the state sector, and also mental health hubs in every secondary school. And that is the difference that money will make to the education of the 93% of children who are in our state schools today who are not getting a nearly good enough deal under this Conservative government.
Okay. Rachel, what an absolute delight for me to have done this with you, and thank you to the audience, and best wishes to you.